So there's the next part of the mortgage. There are two riders that are here that have a couple. They're complicated and they're long, but the only words that are on them that are really of any relevance are at the top here, where it says tax-exempt financing rider, and then on the other one it says owner occupancy certificate. And this in part has to do with the fact that it's a CHFA loan, and CHFA requires you to be an owner-occupier. So for the length of the loan, for as long as you've borrowed this money, you have to be an owner-occupier. You're not permitted to rent this out to someone else. Because if you do, if you want to be Donald Trump and rent this out to someone else and go buy another property, they want their money back so they can loan it to someone else. Here's the complicated part. CHFA in part gets its money by selling bonds. They sell tax-free municipal bonds, which you may have heard of. You know, you've heard the expression tax-free municipal bond, but what is that? You know, if someone has a baby, you go and you buy them a savings bond, you know, and it's a $25 bond. It is, you pay $18 for it or $18.75 or something for it, and 8 years later they can cash it in and they get $25. You know, when you buy a bond, you're really not buying a bond. You know, you're not buying something. You know what happens when you buy a bond? You're loaning the United States government $18.75. You're making a loan to the government. The bond is the IOU. But you know, the way we phrase it is you bought a bond. The truth is, you loan the government $18, and when they give it back to you 8 years later, $25, that extra money is interest. Now, you've heard of stocks and bonds, right? Companies, when they need to raise money, will sell bonds. And all a bond is saying, please loan me $5,000. Here's the piece of paper that says I owe you $5,000, and they pay interest on it. So say IBM wants to raise money, and they'll sell a bond, and I'll loan IBM $5,000. I buy the bond, and then they have to pay me 5% interest or something like that on it. Otherwise, I wouldn't give them the money, right?
Right.
When I get that 5% from IBM for the bond each year, when they pay me, until they pay me back my money, what do I have to do with the interest they paid me? Reported on my taxes, right? You have a savings account. Every year you get a 1099 that says you made $150 of interest. You include it in your taxes. It's the same thing with the bond. Now, Connecticut goes to raise money in part to loan it to you. So Connecticut goes and floats the bond issue. Here's the thing. Because it's a municipality, because it's a government, when Connecticut borrows money from me and they pay me interest at 5%, I don't have to tell the IRS about that. That's why it's called a tax-free municipal bond. And all it is Washington trying to encourage me to decide. I mean, if I think about it, if I can loan money to IBM at 5% and they pay me interest and I pay taxes on that, or I can give it to Connecticut and they pay me money and I don't have to pay taxes, I'm more inclined to give my money to Connecticut. Right. Now, it's not as simple as that, because in part what happens is that Connecticut can say, look, if IBM is paying 5%, we'll pay 4%. And I still may loan my money to Connecticut, because even though I'm getting less of an interest rate, I'm not paying taxes on that. So it's worthwhile for me, since I don't give 20 or 30% to the government. Sure, they may pay me less in interest, but I'm not losing 20 or 30% to the government. So I'm still giving Connecticut money, which means Connecticut gets to borrow money at less than the market rate. I get a tax break because I've invested my money in a way where I get a tax break. And now CHFA has money to loan to you at 3.875 at a cheap interest rate. And what happens is the system almost can pay for itself sometimes, where CHFA may be borrowing the money given the current market conditions at 3%. So they borrowed it from me at 3. They charge you 3.875, and the system pays for itself. Okay, now why am I telling you this? Because that's long and boring. It's in part because these two riders that we just talked about, the tax-exempt financing rider is saying, you see all these words here, but what it's getting to is saying, look, we have a bonding program there where we have a tax-exempt bonding program, and one of the requirements of that is that you're using this money to buy a house to live in, a condo to live in. You're not using it to buy a yacht. So this is you saying, when you guys sign this, that you know that there's this program and you're not doing anything to jeopardize Connecticut's program by using the money for an inappropriate purpose. You've told them the truth. Part of the program is that you have to be an owner-occupier because they want to use this money for a special purpose, which is homeownership. Not for you to invest in real estate, but homeownership. So this one, even though there are all these words here, the main part of it again is that it's the owner occupancy certificate, which goes along with their bonding program. Okay? So that's what these are that we did a second ago. The complicated part of it is this thing called the recapture tax. The recapture tax clearly was invented by people who I'll often say we took a lot of drugs in the 60s. It's like one of the weirdest programs that you can imagine. The most the tax can ever be, okay, so it has all these little steps to it, and in the end probably won't apply, but it could. The most the tax can ever be is stated here. It's 6.25% of the original amount you borrowed. So given the amount that you've borrowed, the most that it can ever be is this much money. Now the weird part is, that only occurs in the 5th year after you've purchased. So this is a few steps, so bear with me. The most they can ever take is this much, or half of your gain. Meaning if you sell it and you make 100 grand, they can't take 50. This is the most they can take.
That's the most pure.
If you sell it and you only make 12,000, you don't owe them 12,000. The most they can take is half of that, or 6,000.
Okay.
Okay. Now that particular number only applies in the 5th year. That's why I say it's crazy. It only applies in the 5th year after you bought. In the 1st year, it's actually 20% of that amount. And what happens is, slide that over. It's just this odd little thing where it goes up and down. In the 5th year, it's 100% of that 6.25%. And then it's 80% on each year on either side of it. So in the 4th year and the 6th year, it's 80% of that maximum number. And it just goes up. So it starts at 20, 40, 60, 80, and it peaks in the 5th year where it's 100%. Another way of looking at it is it's 0.125, and then it's 0.250, and it maxes out at this 6.25. The point is, it starts out low. In your case, for example, using the example of $12,000, it would be 20% of that, which would be about $2,000. So if you're selling in the 1st year, it's 2,000, 4, 6, 8. And in that 5th year, the most it could be is that 12,000. And then as time goes by, 6, 7, 8, 9, it tails off. Have you heard this thing where some people say, do I have to live there for 9 years? People hear that there's something about it. You don't have to live there for 9 years. You could sell this tomorrow if you wanted to. But the tax might apply for 9 years. That's where people get confused. They hear the 9 years and they think you have to live there with the CHFA loan. You don't have to live there. You can move anytime you want. But this tax might apply. So again, the most it could be is this, but it starts out low, it builds up to that in the 5th year, and then it tails off and it's gone by the 9th year. Then, the next part is, it depends how much money you're making. So if you look at this, you'll see this is clearly more money than you guys, just the way it's set up is this is designed to be higher than you're making right now. So if in the 1st year you go to sell, if you're not making this much money, the tax doesn't apply at all. So everything I've talked about becomes irrelevant.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay? If you're not making this much money, and you can see in the different years it gets higher and higher. So here in that 5th year that's 100%, it's $150,000. If the two of you together are not making $150,000, this is all completely irrelevant. You got kids?
Yes.
Okay. So there's more than 3 people in the house. So you can see the numbers are yet even higher. So if we're talking about that 5th year, we're now at $170,000.
All right.
So most clients look at this and go, okay, you know what, if I'm making $170,000, I'll be happy to pay their silly tax. It doesn't apply to most people, but it's one of the weird things about the bonding program that lets CHFA have the money to loan to you, and that's the recapture tax. Doesn't apply to most people. There are a few other things that I could say about it. For example, if you die, and that's why the property is sold, it doesn't apply. If you sell the property and you lose money, it doesn't apply. You don't owe them a tax if you haven't got a profit. If you give the place to your sister, they'll impute a value and figure out, does this apply or not. But again, the most important thing is you really need to have these really high numbers going on here, or it just doesn't apply at all. Okay? You guys can sign
So if
down
we
here.
do the lotto,
But I'm not sure that counts as income.
oh,
I don't, I'm not sure I know the answer to that, but if you hit the lotto one year, sell it the next year.